Hey there, we are Rob and Joanna Tigan. Welcome back to the Growing Home Together podcast. We've been married for over 30 years and we've parented our 5 kids through all the ages and stages. We're excited to share our passion for caring for the soul of your family with you. Thanks for joining us. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Thank you so much for joining us today for the Growing Home Together podcast. You know, one thing that seems to always happen when we record an episode is that the particular topic is sure to pop up in our life that week. So sure enough, this morning started out a little bumpy with our son. He's been trying to take on the responsibility of getting himself up in the morning, but so far he has only about what would you say, Rob, a 50% success rate of setting his alarm and then getting out of bed when it goes off. So Rob and I found ourselves going in there over and over to wake him up so he does not miss the school bus.
But what we realized is we're not actually helping him with his independence if we keep rescuing him from sleeping. And so interestingly enough, our son recently asked us to stop waking up and let the chips fall where they may. And that meant this morning he overslept, he missed his bus, and we had to deal with the consequences that came with that.
Right. And that made today's episode hit home for sure, because we had to ask the question if helping was actually not helping our son, or if it was just feeding an entitled spirit that it's mom and dad's job to make sure that his life goes smoothly. And this can hit in all kinds of areas, like how much to buy for our kids or how much we expect them to help around the house. And today's guest, Kristen Welch, has wrestled through these questions in her own home. Kristen is the author of Raising Grateful Kids in an Entitled World, and she's also the founder and CEO of Mercy House Global, a nonprofit organization whose mission is to empower marginalized communities with life-changing opportunities that create hope. So Kristen has discovered the connection of gratitude to happiness, to hard work, and to generosity that can show the love of God to others. Thank you so much, Kristen, for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
So before we jump in, we would just love to learn a little bit more about you and your family and what led you to write this book of raising kids in an entitled world.
Yeah. Well, I'm a mom of 3 children. My youngest is a senior in high school, 17. And then I have a 22-year-old who is in medical school. And my oldest is 24, and she's in her first postgraduate career workplace. And so I actually wrote this book in the trenches as a parent who was literally wrestling through some of the scenarios that you opened with. And I think what was really the catalyst for writing the book was my own entitlement, discovering my own entitlement, which unfortunately someone is entitling our kids, and it's usually the parents. And so really this book is a book for moms and dads to really understand and dive into what we're modeling to our kids. And our motivations can be really pure, just wanting to create a happy home and successful kids, and right, like not having all the battles. And sometimes we can, in our attempt to give them the world, we can just give them too much. And so this was definitely a labor of love, and probably one of the hardest things I've ever done was writing a parenting book while parenting. Now that I'm a few years out and I see I'm launching kids into the world, I believe and am more passionate about these principles than ever before.
Yeah, that's great. And I love your book because it really challenges us to take, a fresh look and a view of what it means to be happy. And you kind of dig into the research and the culture of, the American dream. And it's a lot different today, I think, than what we talked about, when the American dream first came up. So what do you think the typical definition of happiness is in this day and age?
Well, I would say culturally, it's probably getting what we want. Unhappiness would be when our circumstances don't align with what we want. And so I don't think that is the biblical view of, joy and contentment. Happiness is so connected to our environment and to our circumstances. And the honest truth that we all know as adults is life is full of trials and tribulation, and there are going to be hard things that we go through. And if we don't allow our children to experience those in the safety of the family unit in their childhood, they will experience it out of that environment, but they will experience it. And so we have an opportunity, rather than to cocoon them and protect them from the world's normal and the ups and downs and just the hardships, we can walk with them through that. And it doesn't mean it's easy. There's really nothing easy about what I just said, but they're not alone in doing it. And I think we just can't protect our kids from their own stories and from the sorrow and the grief in our world. And I do think, the global climate is just, we're probably not doing as good of a job as we think in protecting our kids from what's really happening in the world. They're probably getting that in a lot of different areas. And so I think it's a conscious decision to walk together through life and understand that we're just not always going to be happy.
Yeah, I think that's good. And I think you're right. Probably that idea of getting what we want hasn't changed, but I think the culture is screaming that, and our kids are hearing that constantly in so many different ways, maybe more than we did as kids, even though the message might be the same. And so I think, that's where your book is really helpful, because I think as parents, we have to lean in and probably work harder to communicate to our kids a different way. But I think even as parents, it is overwhelming to keep up with all the messages coming and jump into it. And so your book is a great resource that way.
Right. And I think even access, right? Like with social media and online shopping and the internet as a whole, it has changed so significantly since we were kids because of access. And we just didn't know we didn't know. We had to wait for the news, 6:00 news, to even know what was going on in the world. We didn't have access at our fingertips. And so I think there's a lot of wisdom required in parenting, like how much is too much access to those things. And I talk about some of that in the book with cell phone usage and social media. And then I think we can't prevent that access forever. And so we don't want to shield them entirely. And so when they're experiencing independence in college, that's the first time they are navigating it on their own. So it is a conscious partnership where you're balancing all of those components. But I definitely think access has changed parenting so much for all of us.
Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, our kids know that you just click and your box can arrive on the porch within 24 to 48 hours. Right. Yeah. And you mentioned this. I mean, what really jumped out at me in your message is that before we can address the entitlement that we see in our kids, we really have to deal with it in ourselves first. What are some kind of tangible ways that we can identify if we do have our own sense of entitlement, or we do have our own gratitude issue as parents?
Yeah, I think, parenting is holding up a mirror in a lot of ways to our own lives as adults. And it's a painful process to just reflect and to be honest and vulnerable, accountable. I think it starts with parenting ourselves. What are we asking of our kids? Are we doing what we're asking of them? If we're monitoring their screen time, who is monitoring our screen time? If we are asking them to, tithe from their first job, are we being generous with our resources? I think parenting is a mirror. And what's so interesting about children is they're incredibly smart, and they can sniff out hypocrisy faster than a hound dog, right? Like they know when we are not doing what we're telling them to do. And so I think that is such a critical part of this journey, is being who you say you're going to be. And honestly, research shows us that, young adults are leaving the church in droves because of hypocrisy in their homes. Their parents weren't modeling what they were preaching, and they are seeing that chasm between the two. And so I think it's really, that's not rocket science. It's pretty basic, but we have to walk whatever we're talking about. I've had my own life experience, and then just talked to so many families about this subject, and everyone wants to know, like, what's the key? What unlocks all of this? How do we raise kids who choose to follow Jesus. And I think it is so much simpler than we realize. It's not necessarily the right schools or reading the right books or a curriculum. I think it's being so in love with Jesus that our kids can't help but see it by example. They see us living a life that is holy, and they want that because they see the contentment regardless of the situation. They see the joy in us in the middle of a circumstance that might not invite joy in. And so I think modeling it is such a critical, it's also very, very hard, right? Because we have things as adults that are just hard. We're tired. Sometimes it's easier to give in. It's the conveniences that we're offered. Those are enticing to us too. And so I think living a life that we want our kids to model starts with the way that we are living it out day after day after day.
That's good. Thank you for that. You had some things to say about something that can kind of drive the feeling of entitlement in us as adults, and that for a lot of us, it is driven by comparison to other people. I mean, it is tempting to compare your house to your neighbor's house, or your car to the other cars in the pickup lane at school, or your kid's performance to, your best friend's straight A student who never gets in trouble. So for you, how did you break free from comparing your life and your stuff to everybody else's?
Yeah, that's a great question, because no one has to teach us how to do that.
No, they don't.
It's just innate. I guess it's human nature, but you can have a 2-year-old, two 2-year-olds in a room who are fighting over the same toy, and they say mine, right? Like, we don't teach them to say that's mine. And so I think we want what other people have. It is part of the human condition, probably part of the fall of man. But what we do have the opportunity to do is to teach ourselves and our kids how to compare ourselves to people who don't have as much. Because what that does is it balances us in a way that, we need perspective. And if we are only interacting and living in a bubble with people who are just like us, we're just going to compare ourselves and feel like we need what they have, or they have more. We're always going to see what we don't have instead of what we do. And so when we can throw open our windows and our doors of our home and invite people in our home who are different than us, or go outside of our home and serve people who are vulnerable in our communities, what we're really doing, I mean, obviously we're doing something good and healthy there, but we're also showing the other side of the coin, and that not everyone has what we have. Not every family looks like our family. Kids pick up on that. I remember years ago, I sent my kids with our church youth group on like a local missions trip, basically, not even an hour from our house. And it was a working missions trip where they were just going to help repair some homes. And my kids were it just opened their eyes to suffering in our own city in a way they just didn't know. And I'll never forget one of my kids. The first thing when I picked him up, my daughter said, did you know there are people in our town who don't have floors? Like, the ground is their floor because the wood is rotten and you can see the dirt. And this is a kid who I had taken to Kenya her entire childhood. And that probably was a catalyst for her more than traveling overseas, because it's easy to say, well, that's another country. Of course, there's poverty there. But to see her own city, that there were people struggling, she literally got home from that trip. We drove in. They had slept on sleeping bags and kind of roughed it for a week, and hugged the floor, laid on the floor and tried to give the floor a big bear hug. I'm so thankful we have floors. And gratitude shows us what we have instead of what we don't. And we don't know if we don't get out of our bubble. And so perspective is such a gift for adults and kids, right? We need perspective because our normal is not the world's normal.
Yeah, you're right. I remember years ago, we decided to step into the role of foster parenting, and with this mindset, we went to bless a child with security
Right.
and safety and all of that. And we had no idea that we were the ones that needed God to bless us through that, because exactly like you say, our kids really hadn't spent time with families where there wasn't a safe and loving daddy to tuck them in at night, or they didn't have housing security or job security or food security,
Right.
or even just the community and like the extended family and all the resources that we just get to assume that kind of hang us all together and keep us going from a place of strength. To see those absences of those was such an eye-opening thing. And we needed that,
Yes.
And I think God knew we needed that too. Yeah.
Yes, because the very environment that we worked so hard to create, which is a safe, comfortable place where our family can grow and thrive together, is also the exact environment that can deceive them into thinking everybody has this and we deserve this and we have a right to it. One of the things that I do, my day job is running a nonprofit, and we work with refugees in one program that we have in our city. And it's always so incredible to meet a refugee who was a leader in their city. They owned a company, they owned their home, they went to college, right? Like they were my peer in every way. And because of war and because of circumstances out of their control, their lives were turned upside down and they ended up in a refugee camp and then in my country where they don't speak the language. And so I think, as entitled as we might feel that we have worked hard and we've achieved the American dream, the only thing that's eternal is heaven and God, and what we hold today can be removed from us and we can all become vulnerable. And so I think knowing that our joy and our contentment isn't in stuff, and it's not in our circumstances or even our relationships. We find that in God. That's the biggest lesson I still want my kids to learn, and I try to live it out every day, that He's the one who will not let us down, and our safety and our comfort is in God. It is not in what we have.
That's good. Yeah. Thank you for that. As I was reading through your book, one of the things that's very easy for me to fall into is this passive mindset. With the things that we do for our kids. I've got a teenager that loves McDonald's French fries, and I've got this great app where we get good deals all the time. And so if I've got $5 in my pocket, why, and we're driving by, why not just grab a large fry coming here or coming there, and so. But you really kind of challenge that thinking. And what does it cost our kids if we're always saying yes to them and doing something just because necessarily we can?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think we're not setting them up for the real world, because their first boss is not going to always drive them through McDonald's and say yes. Their future spouse, their children, we're really creating an environment that doesn't match what we're launching them into. And so just because we can doesn't mean we should. And I do think a lot of entitlement, thrives there, because for the most part, we have an overabundance. We have more than we need as Americans. And that is a very slippery slope, because we begin to really believe that we deserve it. And so I think being aware of it is probably the first way to resist it, and asking questions or requiring some work so that it's not just an expectation, but it's a reward or a payment of sort, right? Like a consequence, a positive consequence of your actions, rather than every time we drive by the McDonald's, I get it because I want it. And that's such a countercultural message, especially I think it's either McDonald's or Burger King. It's like, have it your way is their slogan, because we live in a society that tells us we can have what we want when we want it. And the online world and social media and the instant gratification have only made those things harder to defeat. It's a very countercultural message to raise our kids in this mindset.
That's good, because you're reminding me, we've had like different seasons where we have recognized, and I mean, maybe this is one of those where you don't go passive and I have to keep my radar up, because we've had different seasons where we've recognized, where we've gotten in those patterns where we have just kind of given to our kids because we can. And then we will recognize like, okay, like that's the third time in the last 7 days we've gone to McDonald's. He's not saying thank you anymore. He's not, because he does, as you said, he just kind of expects it. And it's not that I think he's not trying to be, but he forgets too. Like he forgets that this isn't just something that is handed to anybody and everybody when you want it, but it is something to be grateful for and thankful for. And so we've had periods where we've said, I think we're going to take a break from such and such for a while because it seems like we've kind of lost some perspective. You're reminding me of how I have to have that radar up on a more regular basis.
You saying patterns is really identifying, because I think, getting McDonald's French fries is like not an overt gross sin. It's not a bad thing. And they are good. And it's fun.
Yeah.
And it's convenient. But I think it's the pattern that leads to expectation, that leads to entitlement. That's I deserve this. And we always do this. And kids really, they will hold us to that, right? Like we always do this on the way home from church on Sunday. And then sort of manipulate us and make us feel bad if we don't do that. And it's that pattern and that rhythm. And I think it's so wise to stop and say, we're going to mix things up a little bit. We don't always do this, right? Yep. Today, we're going to buy McDonald's gift cards and give them to the single moms in our church. Like we're going to, because they would probably like fries too. So it's just that little tweaking of how can we take something like this and think about someone else, because it's just so natural to always think about ourselves.
Yeah, we had started to get into the pattern that you mentioned with Donut Day, because Donut Day with Dad is really fun every week before school. And it had started to turn that way. And kind of like you're saying, it occurred to our son, hey, so-and-so has a birthday and I could bring them a donut on the bus. And now what's kind of shifted into is it's our donut day. And so every week the question isn't what kind of donut do you want? It's, I wonder who I could bring a donut to today. And he tries to mix it up. And it's just been really sweet. It didn't mean donut day went away. It's just the focus took a turn. Yeah.
That's part of the danger is like, we don't want to be legalistic and we don't want to swing too far to the other side of this, where it's just a bunch of rules and there's no grace and there's no fun. And I'm probably more of that. I'm an Enneagram 1 and I'm like, this is the way you do things, right? And so I have to really remember that it is a balance. It is a balance. And I think we can just tweak that a little bit and get ourselves back in balance.
I'm going to shift the question a little bit, not too much, but a little bit, because I think everybody's going to think all we do is give our teenager junk food.
Well,
donuts and fries.
He did have vegetables for dinner, I promise.
but as we're talking about getting, we are moving into a really heavy season of gift giving in our house, because from now until Thanksgiving, we've got 6 birthdays in our family. Plus then we roll right into Christmas and a grandkid with a birthday, and here we go. So what are some ways we can think through our gift giving so that more isn't just more for our kids?
Yeah, I love talking about this because there's so many opportunities to give a very good gift and also a lesson, some perspective. Experiences make fantastic gifts because it's something to look forward to. It's togetherness. It's memorable. So I think when I feel like we're shifting too much we kind of have the same dynamic on our calendar where from now until January, we have a lot of heavy gift giving seasons and events. What are things that we can do together rather than buy for each other? And it's interesting because I think my kids were a little resistant in the beginning, and now they're at the ages where they are more budget conscious and they're buying their own gifts. And so they're like, what's something that I could buy the whole family that we could do together? And so we're embracing that more because not all of us are living together anymore, because 2 of my kids aren't at home, and it's rewarding for more reasons than one, because it's a future date where we can all be together. So I love experience gifts for kids and I love when my kids give me experience gifts, something that we can do together and spend time together. I think going against cultural norms and trying to buy gifts that help people is such a great way to teach our kids the perspective that we have more people being trafficked in labor trafficking currently than in any other season and time period in history. And so much of what is made is actually hurting people. And that's a big, big world of we're uneducated in, I think, as a culture. And no one would intentionally give a gift that hurts someone else, right? The whole concept is blessing someone. That's why we give gifts. But we can actually contribute to human trafficking by what we buy. And so it's a difficult world to navigate, but also gifts are a great way to start teaching our kids that a handmade gift can help a person. And so that's just the reality, right? There's a cost to being able to click and have something the next day, right? Someone is paying for that other than the $10 we're paying for the item. That fast pace, I can have it when I want it. The odds are someone is being hurt in the process of that. And so as responsible parents, even though it is difficult to navigate the nuances of that, the underbelly of that truth, we have to try. And so handmade gifts are a huge part of our families. You know, I have kids who can crochet and one that's an artist, and they take their hobbies and they're like, what can because I value handmade gifts more than anything else. And so that's a part of our family dynamic, really a core value of our family. They just know mom wants a handmade gift. And so I think we can turn this giant ship very slowly in practical ways that help. You know, one of our biggest family traditions on Christmas Day is not opening gifts. It is every year we pick a different country. We plan ahead and we create a huge feast from a recipe that requires us to learn a new skill, whether it's making homemade pasta together, hand rolling tortillas. We've done sushi. We'll pick a different country and just even if it's really challenging, we love food. And what that does is it gets us, we're unplugged, we're in the kitchen, we're together, we're spending 4 hours on this huge meal and then we're eating it. And that is the number one memory my kids are like, that's why they want to come home for Christmas, not because of the gift under the tree, because really the gift of being together is the greatest gift a family can have. And so there's just a lot of opportunities to think outside the box when it comes to giving gifts.
I love that. I think you're going to help us all start getting those creative wheels turning. So thank you. Yeah. One thing that really fascinates me is how you build this bridge between having a grateful mindset and having a strong work ethic. And I'm not sure if I would have made that leap as the way that you did. That's so awesome. So what is it about thankfulness that is tied to responsibility and a job well done?
Well, I think they're really hard to separate when nobody wants employees who don't do a good job and who half do their work. And when I wrote this book, I did not have a staff of 30 people like I do now. And so I believe this even more as I run an organization. And I'm so thankful to have employees that have a strong work ethic, because I think gratitude is a response to that. And it creates an environment to slow down. We can't be grateful if we're rushing and hurrying. We miss so much. And so practicing gratitude, the discipline of naming what we're thankful for and creating that as a habit forces us to look around and not just name the big things, right? Like, I'm alive today and I have food on the table. No, we're like, that flower on my desk bloomed. I got a response to an email that I've been waiting on. Gratitude forces us to slow down. And so it makes us more conscientious and careful And I think there's a responsibility to that. And so even in the workplace, I've brought a lot of these principles into my job because there is a very strong connection in being able to name what we're thankful for, because we really don't need help learning how to complain. We do that naturally, but we do need to practice gratitude, and we have to be very diligent with that. If you don't teach your kids how to work hard and to physically do things, then they take it for granted. Yesterday, my son saw me wrestling the 2 trash cans to the street, and he had just gotten home from a 12-hour day where he's going back and forth commuting to medical school, and ran to take those from me. And the reason he did that is because he knew how heavy they were, because he takes the trash out, right? There's this perspective when we realize, wow, there's a lot that goes into fixing a mill, then they're more apt to want to help clean up because they know, right? But they didn't ever know that if they never fix a mill. If your kids if we don't give them the opportunity to contribute. And so I think it starts with an invitation, right? It doesn't have to be forced, but you can make it fun. And so if mom is the only one cooking and cleaning, first of all, that's not fair. And it's not what I want my kid. I don't want my son to see that. I don't want my son to think that's what, women do. And so I think the correlation is there, because once we have worked hard, we have a different perspective. And we are grateful when we see someone else working hard because we know what it costs them.
Yeah, that's good. And, I think in light of what you're saying, we're one of those families that creates chore lists and hangs them up for the kids, and, things, take out the trash, empty the dishwasher, clean your room, those kind of things. But there's a big difference between, checking off a list of getting those things done and kind of taking responsibility toward working and helping without always being asked. And so,
yeah.
You've shared a little of that, one of your, I love that, make it an invitation. And a kind of a team thing. I love that. So are there other things that we can do toward, to help with that? Yeah,
I think besides modeling it and inviting them into it, I think we can participate in, it's a lot of work to run a family and to do all the things. And, some of it's just our kids make assumptions, right? They just assume that there's always going to be Wi-Fi until there isn't. Mm-hmm. And then the world comes crashing down. And so I think taking breaks, fasting from technology 1 day a week, is a way that, as a family, mom and dad included, is a way that reminds our kids, somebody's paying for this. This didn't just magically happen, and it's not necessarily something I deserve. Not to mention, especially with the technology example, we need to take breaks, right? For our brain and productivity, and unplugging there's so much science behind why that's so good for us. Our kids don't know unless we show them. They don't know what it's like to walk the aisles of a grocery store with a list that we have planned and load our cart, have enough money to cover those groceries, load it into our car, unload it, put it in the refrigerator, and then cook a meal and then clean up, right? There's so many steps to that. They just come downstairs for dinner. So I think inviting them into all of those parts, and the more we can do that, the more we're equipping them as adults, right? They know how to make a phone call. They know how to set up a doctor's appointment. They know how to put gas in their car. My daughter called today and she was like, my 24-year-old, she called me this morning and she said, she lives in an apartment in downtown Dallas, and it's in her first career. And she was like, I think a neighbor accidentally gave my apartment number, and my electricity is going to be turned off because I just got off the phone with a company. And she was trying to navigate this. I'm like, this is what I did. And she was asking for reassurance. And I was like, you did exactly what I would do. But we're equipping our kids to be, independent. And so if we don't invite them into how a family functions and how to navigate those things, they're going to figure it out on their own, which is okay. But we have the opportunity to walk with them through that, not to do it for them. It was funny when you started this session talking about your son oversleeping, my daughter, who's 17, jumped out of bed, ran down the stairs, and she was like, I missed theater troupe. And she's the president of the theater club. I missed the officer meeting. And she was just in a total, what do I do? And I was like, well, what do you think you should do? Right. And let her come up with her own solution. And she did not like her own solution, which was, I have to email everyone and just be honest that I overslept. And I was like, yeah, that is your only option. I mean, but she came up with a solution. She just didn't like the solution. But I could have said, well, I can email the teacher and I can try to put a Band-Aid over this for you. But at the end of the day, we cannot protect our kids from their own mistakes or from the mistakes of the world. We can only do our best to prepare them and then walk with them. And I did encourage her. I was like, listen, you're human. This has never happened before. Just be honest and say you messed up. Like, people really value vulnerability and honesty. And so it's okay. You goofed, and own that and then move on. And now what can you do so that this never happens again? Ask her that question. And she came up with 3 things that she could do so this never happens again. And so I didn't get to protect her from that. She still had to show up at school today, having missed a meeting that she was in charge of. Like, that's hard, but that is also life. And she now has a plan. She was like, well, next time I'm going to look at my calendar the day before so that I know I have the alarm set, right, and make preparation. And that's what we're doing. We're raising these little humans that are going to face some of the same things that we face, the temptation and the urge to rescue our kids from feeling those things. We can't do it. We can sit with them in it. I think that's really important, that they process their pain and suffering and they have space for that. And we're not like, get over it, you're fine. Like, let's give them space for it. But we rushing in to, fabricate, well, I can tell the teacher this, and this rescue mentality, it just hurts our kids.
Yeah, right. And something that's been going through my mind too today is, I wish I could remember who said it, but they were describing how easy it is to slide into treating your kids as if they're guests in your home instead of full equal members in your home. And if you're a guest, yeah, you're probably going to get waited on, but then you're not experiencing the joy and the intimacy of that close kind of interdependent relationship that only a family can have. And so when it comes to, the contributing to the house and doing more than just a chore list, but, making things happen so you can lean on one another can go a long way. And I know for our son with our talk about gratitude too, like for him to know that we're grateful for him, rather
right.
than we're just grateful for the things or the results or whatever, seems to be motivational in and of itself. Like, wow, my parents really needed me and I came through, and it makes us closer. So yeah, kind of getting away from that I'm a guest here mindset, but that can be a little tricky sometimes.
Yeah, I love that. I think we've done this for years, and we kind of got out of it for a little bit because we moved and just, logistically kind of forgot about it. But my daughter brought it back up not too long ago, and she was like, can we get that jar back out, our little gratitude jar? And we put it on the kitchen table. And a lot of our gratitude are things that have happened in our day, but it's so special when our gratitude is for each other and we can verbalize that. I just don't think there's enough of that. I mean, the other day I walked in the living room and my oldest daughter was visiting, and my kids had a funny look on their face, and I could tell they were talking about me. And I was like, what? And they were like, we just really respect you, Mom. And I started crying. I was like, oh my, I didn't know I needed to hear that. A 22 and 24-year-old are like, we respect you. And I like that word of affirmation for me, it blessed me. Like, my kids blessed me. And we have the opportunity to bless each other. And I think our kids need to hear that too. Like, I'm proud of you. I know that this was hard and you did it anyway. That's what family is about. And so It's not just rules and trying to create this environment where our kids can thrive, but it's real life honesty and vulnerability and apologizing. Oh my goodness, I'll never forget the first time I apologized to my kids for different reasons. But, I realized I unlocked something when I showed them that I was human. I was very sorry I'd made a mistake, right? Like our kids need to see that we're doing our best, but we also make mistakes.
Good stuff. One thing I really appreciate about what you offer in your book and in your writing is just you give us a lot of great ideas for helping us change our family's perspective. And, it's not just a matter of saying no to buying this or making life easier for our kids. It's about saying yes to habits and experiences that foster thankfulness and giving. So can you share some practical ways that we can help move our kids more in the direction of gratitude?
Yeah, I mean, this one is maybe a little self-serving, but for me, part of the journey why I wrote this book is really being exposed myself and then being able to expose my kids to the world's normal. And kids are far more generous by nature than adults are. I think we lose some of that childlike, right, I'm going to share my lunch mentality. But they need opportunities. They need opportunities to be generous. And so I think especially this time of year, there's so many ways, practical ways that you can do that. I also want to be efficient as a mom, and I like the idea of slowing down and not doing more. I think in order to do more, you probably have to lay something down because we all run at such a pace. But I've always had this philosophy of, is there an extra seat at our table or in our car that we can invite someone into our family dynamic? And that has really proven to be, it's given my kids freedom to expand our family in a way that serves people. Whether it's, I have a niece who spends a lot of time with our family, a woman from Thailand who considers our family home when she's in town. Growing up, my kids always had neighbors going to church with us, or their parents worked during dinner and dinner was on them. And so they would come to our house to eat. So sort of expanding our family in the sense of we have an overabundance and we're already eating together. We're already going to church. We're already doing these things. Who can we invite? My son is in this cohort with grad students from all over the United States. And he's the only student in this medical program that's actually from the city that Baylor College of Medicine is in. And so he talks about these kids, which they're really young adults, but they're homesick because they're away from home for this 30-month residency / program. And every time he mentions it, I'm like, bring them home. Bring, like, if they're homesick, let me fix them a meal. Let's host Thanksgiving for them. Like, what can we, that we're already doing? How can we expand? And I think that's the gospel of hospitality, right? Like, that's just sharing what you have with others. And that's not rocket science, but it's just easy to get so swept up in our family's routine and culture that we forget that is not normal for a lot of people. There are a lot of people who spend the holidays alone or eat meals by themselves. And who can we share our lives with? Because when we do that, it ends up enriching us as much as it does them. We have, right? Like, it changes the dynamic and we have rich conversations. And I'm not naturally, I wouldn't say I have the gift of hospitality just in my personality. Practicing this has introduced me to some of my favorite people in the world, and it makes me want to do it more. And my kids really, as young children, just naturally always wanted to invite people over. And so I think that's a really great way as we go into the holiday season, using what we have to serve people where we are.
I love from everything that we're hearing and what we know of you that God has just woven a heart of gratitude and giving into your family. And From there, he has led you to minister far beyond the walls of your home. And in the years since you wrote the book that we're talking about today, the impact of Mercy House Global has just developed so much. And before we have to say goodbye today, we would love to know more about that ministry. Can you share with us?
Yeah, I'd love to. Mercy House Global is a nonprofit that empowers vulnerable families with opportunities that create hope. We do that in a lot of different ways. We have maternity homes in Nairobi, Kenya, that are combating human trafficking. Girls who've gotten pregnant, these are teenagers who are really young, gotten pregnant, who can come and live in the home and really get the help they need and rehabilitate. And then we work with the families of the girls so that they can eventually go back home. We started that about 15 years ago, and we just had our 84th baby born in the maternity home. However you would define a vulnerable family, we probably in some way have a program that would assist a vulnerable family. And about 10 years ago, we started doing that in our own city of Houston. Among refugees and women who are overcomers of human trafficking. We provide English classes for refugees. We do a lot of artisan-made fair trade product as a way to break the cycle of poverty in Kenya. At mercyhouseglobal.org, you can find a lot of opportunities. Really, a family started Mercy House, and so we're very family-centric. We believe that the family is the design that God gave the world. Jesus was born into a family when he was here on earth. And so just the mission of the family is at the heart of Mercy House. And we want to keep families together, and we want to empower families with opportunities so that they can thrive. In Jesus' name.
That is phenomenal. And we'll be sure to have links to that in the show notes, because I know everyone's going to want to learn more for sure.
Yes. And if you want fair trade or handmade gifts, I'll put a plug in where you know the person behind the product, and every product provides really access to the gospel, because women or families are put into a program, and the product is a result of that. But it's really unique Christmas gifts and birthday gifts that we hope families will feel equipped, because navigating all of that can be really hard.
Yeah, that's awesome. So thank you for that. And I'm sure there's parents listening today who are, maybe in a season where they're really craving some joy and some more gratitude and just the love of Jesus to fill their homes. And so would you be willing to pray for God to accomplish this in the listeners today?
Yes, I would love to. Thank you. Father, we are so grateful for who you are and what you've done. Thank you for being a loving Father, for inviting us to be a part of the family of God. And your love for the family knows no limits. And God, you tell us that we should consider it joy when we face trials of many kinds, Lord. And I'm sure that represented among those listening today, there are trials and there is suffering, because we live in a broken world. And so, God, I just pray that in the midst of whatever people are facing and enduring, that they would be able to find joy, and they would be content with the circumstances, not because they're easy, but because you never leave us or forsake us. And so, God, I just pray that you would help us to be disciplined and practice gratitude, be thankful for what we have instead of for what we don't. And God, just give us wisdom as parents to lead our families in a way that honors and glorifies you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Well, I know our friends are going to want to learn more about you and your books and the work of Mercy House Global. So where is the very best place to connect with you and your resources online?
I have a blog called wearethatfamily.com that has all those resources listed. And then Mercy House Global is sort of my day job. And then I'm on social media as my name, Kristen G. Welch.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kristen, for taking the time to talk with us today. This has been really encouraging, and I think really refreshed our perspective on our parenting today. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you, friends, for joining us for the podcast today. Rob and I would love to connect with you over on our website at growinghometogether.com. You're going to find all kinds of articles and resources to help you pray for your kids, to grow in faith as a couple, and to spend quality time as a family. At Growing Home Together, we're caring for the soul of your family.
And growing home together with you. Bye.
Bye. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Growing Home Together podcast. We hope you enjoyed it and found some valuable insights to help you care for the soul of your family. Remember to check out growinghometogether.com for more resources, and stay tuned for our next episode coming your way soon.